All right, welcome to the second episode of the Vibe Hour podcast. I'm your host, Logan. I am here with my friend Kyle. And before we get into it, don't forget, grab something cold to drink, grab some snacks, and enjoy the vibes. So, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling good today. Just finished a nice bike ride over here, and beautiful sunny day outside today, so no complaints here.
How are you feeling from last night?
Oh yeah, it was quite the night last night. Felt a bit sick this morning, but seems to be cleared up now with some water, so seem to be good to go.
So yeah, last night it was his birthday, so we went out a little bit. Actually, went unexpectedly. We were extras in a music video. Which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it was super cool. Like just these guys in like spacesuits, and they were like dancing around.
And I just went up to the camera guy. I'm like, "Do you need any extras?" And he's like, "Oh, go talk to the director." So I talked to the director, and the director's like, "Yep, you stand here, you stand here," and just kind of cheer them on a bit. But it's just super fun. You just never know what. Anything can happen. I feel that's a great way to look at life. Anything can happen.
Absolutely, and you never know. You're just going to a nightclub and you just run into a guy filming a music video. Like, what's the chance of that?
Even the bartender said it was pretty random.
Yeah.
I think they were just chill with it because it was a slow night.
Yeah, it was like completely empty.
So they had no problem with it. But apparently, I don't think they booked that space like well in advance. I think the bartender said they just came up and said, "Hey, can we shoot a music video here?" But, anyways, I kind of always like to do fun segments on my podcast. I didn't have anything really planned, but one of the things I sometimes like to do, which is fun, is look up just like funny text messages. Mm-hmm. So I guess we could read a few of those. It's good to have some like jokes, I feel, in a podcast too. So funny texts. I remember this one I read. It was pretty funny. It was you might have seen it, but it was your aunt, mom texts her son, "Your aunt just died, LOL." And the kid's like, "Why is that funny?" It's like, it's not. What's wrong with you? It's like, do you even know what LOL means? And the mom's like, "Yeah, lots of love." So it's funny. Or there was one. Oh, I don't know if I can share it on the podcast. I think I could. I don't know. What was it? Yeah, it was just funny. What do you like to do for, like, where do you get your laughs from? Do you just look up?
Where do I get my laughs from?
Yeah.
Well, sometimes it's just hanging out with your buddy and they just say something really weird and you're like, that's funny, and it can be a good time, or some comedy channels, but it's never really been my thing. Never really been a huge guy for like jokes and stuff. I mean, I only just got into memes.
Oh wow. I'm always the guy who's the clown, who's the comedian in the group a lot. I like telling jokes and stuff like that.
Yeah, sometimes it's just from, trying a really stupid thing and failing really hard and telling the story 100 times and exaggerating it more every time you tell it. Be like, that shark that tried to eat us, it was 100 feet long now.
Or, texted my mom, I got an A in chem. She said WTF. And I'm like, "Mom, do you know... Mom, what do you think WTF means?" "Well, that's fantastic." But yeah, if I texted that to my parents, they would mean, "What the fuck?"
Same. That's just common knowledge. I mean, it just goes to show that abbreviations aren't always the best way to communicate, and how maybe you should, if you really want to get your point across, you should be using the full word.
Oh, yeah. But, this is just a funny text. So obviously they're probably fake, but...
For sure.
But it's still funny to look at some of these things.
For sure. I mean, sometimes it's what people get up to, you know. It's you question your sanity sometimes by just looking at these crazy texts that people have, you know. And
You ever send any funny texts to anyone?
mm, definitely. I mean, not too much. The funniest thing would be the document that my friend sent to the school counselor in grade 12 called Rainy Day. Definitely a funny meme. It was definitely a laugh. I literally could not stop laughing for like 4 hours after school. After the cop pulled us out of class.
Yeah, I haven't sent that many funny texts. I've heard of people getting funny texts. Like, some I work with said that their dads sent a text to them, "You forgot your phone at home." His parents. But yeah, anyways, let's just get into discussion. Like I said in the last episode, by the time you're listening to this, the first episode's out. So I will be not in the next episode. I will be probably talking about the feedback we got from that episode. But yeah, we're still trying to figure this out. There's no video today because of technical difficulties, but I'm hoping to get the video up and running soon. So that's just a little disclaimer for everyone out there. But yeah, so first question in the discussion, and we're going to be talking about forestry, wildlife, climate change, a little bit of everything in regards to the environment, so it should be fun. Anyways, can you tell us about your background and how you became passionate about wildlife and conservation?
Yeah, so I grew up, and my dad, he works for the Ministry of Forest. If you don't know what that is, that's like the government the branch of the government that's responsible for like forest management in out BC, where we are from here in Canada.
Yeah.
So they're responsible for setting allowable cuts. They're responsible for making sure all regulations are followed on Crown land, which is, you know, provincial land that is managed by the provincial government, which represents about 90% of all land across the province. So my dad, he was obviously really passionate about the forests, and growing up, he always would take us out camping and fishing and all through the woods and just teaching me about trees and how different things worked. So that kind of got me passionate. And then moving forward, I started a diploma in forestry in VIU, so Vancouver Island University. And I just finished that in April of this year. So that was really cool and helped me just to like learn a lot more. Definitely an eye-opening experience last summer working for a forestry consultant on the mainland and seeing how operational forestry is, you know, not always portrayed the best in the public view. So seeing how it actually works behind the scenes that maybe most people don't see, you know, and moving forward, I still am not sure that a career in forestry is necessarily for me, but I definitely have a lot of knowledge and can bring that forward as well.
What are like some of the main challenges faced in preserving and managing forest ecosystems?
Yeah, so a lot of the main problems is just competing interests and values. There's only a limited supply of land, and everyone wants different values from that land. Like even different animal habitat is going to need different forest characteristics. So you might manage for, say, deer habitat. It's going to be completely different from bear or from moose or caribou, or, you know, bighorn sheep or Vancouver Island marmot. Everything is going to be managed in a different way, right? So, you know, you have conflicting interests. You want to manage for top priority ecosystems, so ones that are like the most endangered species first. If you can, that's going to be the best priority, but you know, there's a lot of competing interests where we got logging companies that want to make a profit. We've got communities, groups that want to see recreational values maintained. We've got the public that wants to see old growth maintained. We've got all kinds of different competing values and on the landscape, and that makes, you know, making the right choice, if there even is one, or, you know, preserving the ecosystem. Even defining what it means to preserve the ecosystem is quite challenging because, you know, what does a healthy ecosystem, like, what does that look like? Well, it really varies depending on what kind of forest you're talking about, or what kind of animals you want to have living in there. Are we talking about total diversity of total species, or number of individuals of a few species like that? What are we even talking about? We also got the threat of urban development spilling into our forests, clear cutting of forest to completely change the landscape from a forested ecosystem to housing development or new farms and stuff as our population continues to rise. So there's a lot of different threats and a lot of different priorities out there, and the land is just a limited supply.
I definitely feel, like you said, with residential areas and stuff, I feel like they're taking away our greenery, because even the new apartment complex being built up here by where I live, they're cutting down trees and stuff to build, and they're getting rid of our nice greenery around the area.
Yeah, for sure, and that just goes to show that we need to start building more denser development in order to move people into smaller areas, so that the impact on the total land is lower. Even though you might think that low density, there's lots of green space, most people tend to just have grass and a few shrubs, and it's definitely far from a natural ecosystem state. It's best to kind of move people closer together, and then have a lot more green space surrounding the city that has less disturbance running through it to keep our forest intact. It's better to infill our cities with new development where there's maybe a vacant lot that already has been cleared, instead of going out into the forest and cutting down new trees. Keeping as much of the forest intact and building everything you have that's already been disturbed to the highest amount possible to preserve that habitat.
And also, it's just that's what I like about where I live, is because I'm surrounded by trees and stuff. I don't like the super. I like living. I'm not in the outskirts of town, but I like being surrounded by trees and be a little bit more having lots of greenery around me, and not just shrubs and bushes, like you said. Kind of your city lots. I like.
Yeah, so I think that there should be more requirements for apartment development or housing development to maintain as much greenery around their buildings as possible, just for shade purposes, and just to keep the green space there. Keeping we dedicate a lot of space to parking lots and stuff, and that's if we can add trees to those parking lots and line them with trees, that may increase the green space or whatever. But we also got to make sure that any trees that we have are going to be the right species. So making sure that instead of just going out there and being like, well, we have cedar here already, we'll just leave these cedar. Well, the climate here on Vancouver Island is changing. Cedar is starting to die off due to drought. So we've been suffering stage 5 drought here, the highest level here this summer. So that's having a major impact on our forest ecosystems throughout the east coast of Vancouver Island here. So making sure that the tree species that we have, that we maintain, are the most drought tolerant. So if we're going to be cutting any trees to make room for development, taking the ones that are the most susceptible to that drought and leaving ones that may be more able to maintain that kind of, so that we're not just leaving a bunch of trees that are just going to die within 5 years or 3 years or whatever that may be.
And also forest fires throughout the summer are getting rid of a lot of ecosystems.
Yeah, so forest fires happen to be a natural part of our environment. So there's a lot of ecosystems that are fire dominated, which means that trees actually, and the ecosystem requires fire to regenerate itself, or in some cases it's a necessary part of that ecosystem. And when we, as human beings, we've been suppressing wildfires for 100 years. So what happens is that naturally we would get a lot of low intensity wildfires going through. So it would burn down the dead trees and the dying trees, and the ones that are more healthy, they have thicker bark, they all tend to survive those low intensity fires. Well, what happens when we put out every single fire that comes through the landscape? Well, now we got a massive amount of fuel that when a fire does come, it's not going to be that low intensity fire. It's going to be one of these mega fires, and it's just going to rip right through. Mm-hmm. So instead of having frequent but somewhat low scale fires, we're getting really high intensity fires coming through that are just devastating to that ecosystem. And that's partly a forest management problem as much as it can be attributed to warmer temperatures. Obviously that helps, but poor forest management can, obviously, if you're having too much fuel in the landscape, your plantations are too dense, there's too many trees, you're not allowing small scale fires to go through, that's going to be detrimental to the forest. It's not going to be healthy, right? So you got to think about that too. It's climate change, obviously it's playing a role, hotter, drier summers, but there's other factors, right, about increased fuel from dense plantations or the conversion of Douglas fir plantations over to pine, as lodgepole pine tends to be easier to establish after logging, so they'll tend to plant that instead, just so that they can, if the site is suitable, obviously not every site, but that does happen where they tried, Douglas fir is just really hard to get established, so they'll plant pine afterwards. Well, the pine is going to be burning a lot more than the Douglas fir, which has thicker bark, and that all plays a role into what's going on. It's not just saying that climate change is causing more fires. Well, maybe not. There's actually a thing that the number of fires has been decreasing, but the amount of hectares burned by each fire has increased. So we're getting fewer fires, but the ones that do happen are on a much, much larger scale than what we may have seen in the past. I mean, that's obviously, it's not represented across the whole province, different forest types and different fuel types and different types of environments where we have lightning or there's human-caused fires, or it's going to be, quite varying across the landscape, but...
There's lots of human-caused fires I've heard just from, cigarette butts and stuff, and,
Yeah, so that's obviously the worst-case scenario, right? It's mostly around urban environments. It's in areas that probably are going to burn a lot more frequently because they're close to that human-urban interface where there's interactions between a lot of humans and the forest. So that's where you're going to get, you could get fires going through there much more frequently just because humans are going to be causing them, right? So, and the ecosystem may already be stressed in those areas as well because... you've got roads going through, you've got disturbance from people walking over the tree's roots, which could cause disturbance, or you've got changes in drainage patterns as a result of roads and trail networks and that kind of thing as well, which can change the water pattern, stress the trees, and so on, depending on, what you've done. If they try their best to maintain natural drainage, but, let's face it, if you're building a housing development, you're not going to be able to maintain natural drainage. You're going to get water where it didn't go before, which is going to stress the trees, and that in itself will make them more susceptible to fire because they're going to be stressed. Stressed trees tend to burn a bit easier. And then also, you've got dying trees as a result of those changes in drainage patterns, where once there might have been a lot of water, now it's dried up. Well, that tree that was relying on that constant supply of water is now dying of drought, so you got to take that into account as well. It's, climate change plays a significant role, obviously, but it's not the whole picture. No. There's a lot more going on out on the landscape than just climate change, and it's really complex, and most of us can't even begin to really comprehend or understand all the forces that are going on out there.
And also, just climate change and not getting enough rain. We're getting not enough rain to kind of keep the ground wet to prevent more fires from starting.
Yeah, I mean, lack of rain is certainly part of it, but I mean, in order for a fire to start, it needs an ignition source. So just drought on its own isn't likely to cause an increase in fires. Necessarily. The main causes of fires are humans, cigarette butts, campfires, arson, ATVs, sparks from motor vehicles and trains or from lightning sources. So the lightning source may come with rain or it may not, but a drought that doesn't come with rain in an area that has no people and nobody is going out there, probably not going to get it. Really going to get an increase in fires. Just there's no ignition source. But if you get dry conditions, you're close to town. You've got lots of people recreating out there. They're smoking and all that. You know, that's where you're going to get into trouble. And the cigarette butts, not just bad for the wildfire situation. You know, they're a litter, right? They leach toxic chemicals into the ground. They are plastic, which breaks down into microplastics, so that's obviously not good in itself. So, I mean, educating smokers and just the general public to not throw their butts out and just keep them with them. Obviously, that's going to be a big help for not just mitigating the forest fire situation, but, you know, we got a plastic crisis out there. There's, you know, a lot of garbage is getting thrown into the environment, and microplastics are even getting into our food now, so it's something else to keep in mind, you know.
And also, do you see like climate change affecting the wildlife population?
Yeah, so it will, definitely. Like, there's an effect. You can see that with the salmon being a big one with the lack of rain in our rivers. I'm a fisherman myself, and so, you know, we've been waiting on up in the Campbell River, just north of here where we are in Nanaimo. The river is so low right now that the pink salmon are just not coming into the river right now, and waiting for the rains to come up before they move up the river to spawn. And obviously this could have a detrimental effect if the water are too warm and too low. The salmon, they're not going to come up and spawn, or the ones that do are going to be too stressed and likely to die prematurely before they finish their life cycle. So, I mean, there's lots of other animals that are affected by climate change. I mean, some may in fact be positively affected, but that's, again, there's definitely more losers than there are winners when it comes to the climate change situation. And it really depends on where you are in the world too, right? We're going to be seeing some southern species expand in the range if they're just because that kind of climate is expanding, and we'll see the shrinking of northern populations as the northern part of the globe warms at a faster rate compared to the rest of the planet as well. So,
do you think the climate change and the forest fires are the reason why we're seeing more wildlife in the cities, like deer and more just like getting chased out of the forest to more city areas?
I wouldn't agree with that statement at all. I think the reason why there's more deer and animals in the city is that we have encroached on their habitat. Every time we mow down a new forest for apartment block or a subdivision, that forest used to be home to those animals, and now, well, that's where they're used to being. They are going to continue to be where they have known to be, and we're encroaching on their habitat. It's not that, and it's not just development and logging. They're scared off by heavy machinery, and they've learned to adapt to city life to an extent. I mean, cities are a dangerous place for wildlife. Deer may survive in the city, but a lot of them get hit by cars. The sad reality is that drivers are just whatever. They're not paying attention. They're driving too fast. Their deer are on the road, and animals and humans should, cities shouldn't be the most attractive place for wildlife habitat to be. If we've destroyed their habitat, we need to go out there and create close by habitat that's better than what they lost. And I just don't see that happening out there. We destroy a habitat and we don't replace it with anything, or we don't even try, or we could create urban parks or more greenaway and animal corridors through our cities with that are a few hundred meters or even a kilometer width and run across the whole city to provide wildlife to be able to move efficiently through the city in order to reduce that interaction with cars and vehicles. That's also good for people, with that green space can be used for active transportation corridors with cycling or walking. And it gives a chance for, urbanites to see different wildlife that they may not see otherwise. Keeping that, the goal of cooling your city as well, providing that shade for people to go and escape the heat outside. It's kind of a win-win for everyone. I just don't see enough cities doing these kind of projects, but kind of, that would be a great project for cities to take on, and increasing the habitat if areas are underdeveloped and there is no plans for future development in those areas, then restoring them back instead of just leaving them as paved, or we tend to get a lot of invasive species in cities. In Nanaimo here, we have huge problems with Scotch broom and Himalayan blackberries and a lot of invasive plants, and remeditating that back, trying to prevent the spread. That's another thing that we can try to do. But yeah, like most importantly for our cities is just increasing the amount of greenaway space. But it's not just greenaway space, it's making sure that the public has access, and if people go to these places and they care about them, then they're going to try to make it, keep it nice going forward, and be responsible in those areas, fostering that sense of, I am proud of this park, or I want to see that, park with native species thriving and no garbage and no pollution in that area. Yeah.
But that's just never gonna happen. I think people are gonna ever adapt to that. I don't know.
Well, I think people are already starting to adapt. I think with the pandemic, a lot of people have started to go outside a lot more. And parks, just Nanaimo I read a stat the other day that Nanaimo has grown by, the park system here has grown by like 300 hectares since 2018, so in the last 5 years. So that's like around 20% growth in the city's park system, and that's really beneficial to preserving the natural environment, making sure that greenaway space that does exist in cities is public property, because if it's private, it often faces higher disturbances, more invasive plants, and just more garbage and pollution in general. So there's a lot to talk about here.
Trying to find more questions. Some of these seem like kind of just like the same sort of things. Like, you said you were, like, interested in, like, city planning and stuff, right?
Yeah, so I started realizing with my career in forestry that if we want to save our forests and save our green spaces, we have to revolutionize how we plan our cities, especially here in North America. Car-centric infrastructure that is incompatible with a lot of public green space. Parking lots take up more space in our cities than actual development. Like actual stores or houses, or stuff that's producing tax revenue to the government, or providing somewhere where some people with a place to live, is actually taking up more space in our community is actually taking up less space rather than the parking lots. So, providing, getting people out to walk, that, when people are walking and outside, they're going to be appreciating the nature, and they're going to want, nice, safe streets to walk on, lined with trees and green spaces, instead of just paved asphalt and wide streets. So that's how we need a redesign of how we go about planning cities, because the status quo is just destroying way too much land and causing way too much disturbance. So we just need a rethink of how we do things around here. And a couple things to think about when it comes to getting people walking places. Well, that's the quality and safety of infrastructure for walking. So is there a sidewalk? How fast are vehicles are traveling? And, also how far where you want to go is from your house. So if things are closer together, well, it's more convenient to walk there. If they're far apart, it's less convenient to walk. More people are going to take their car. The other one would be the public transit.
Oh yeah.
More frequent and convenient public transit, if it's with priority signals for buses, and other transit, grade separated transit like LRT or subway lines that aren't impeded by the flow of vehicle traffic. That's another one that's going to be huge to get people out of their cars. You can't get people out of their cars. The only solution to traffic congestion is to build viable alternatives to driving. So that's the only way we're going to be able to reduce the amount of parking spaces and the amount of just unnecessary pavement. As it is right now, a lot of cities in North America and here in Nanaimo, they have it. Any development that happens in the city is required to build a certain amount of parking spaces depending on the type of business or the type of development that happens. So what happens is, say for example, you wanted to build a shopping mall. Well, now you're required to build, say, I think in Nanaimo, for example, it's one parking space for every 200 square feet of the mall.
Wow.
So you're building an amount of parking spaces where 90% of the time, a lot of them are going to be empty. We're building them for absolute peak demand time here, which is unnecessarily, destroying ecosystems that otherwise could have been forested just by having arbitrary parking requirements everywhere. It's not to say that if you got rid of that, you would still have parking, obviously. People need to drive. Lots of people have valid reasons to drive.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of trips that people take by car now that could be taken by public transit or cycling. And, people have to realize that cars should be our tool. They're necessary for some people, but for the most part, if we can get trips away from cars where people don't need them and into other modes that are taking up less space, that's obviously a benefit for the trees and for our environment. But that's not just for the environment. Parking spaces are really, really expensive to build. Mm-hmm. They take up valuable land that could be used for other uses. They reduce taxable revenue and cost a lot to maintain. And free parking is pretty much, it's not free. No. People have to pay for that parking, It's included in the price that you go to the store. And people who don't want the parking or don't even drive are still paying for that space. Strong, I don't know if you've ever heard of it. In the U.S., they have this organization called Strong Towns. They've been advocating for the removal of parking minimums to get, people to, and trying to showcase just how expensive parking can be. Like an underground parking spot in a parking garage could cost as much as $60,000 or more.
Wow.
Depending on the size and depending on the type of terrain you're building that parking space in. So that's another thing, right? And just the car-centric infrastructure, as we see, the more roads you have to build, well, that's more maintenance costs. So that's higher taxes. That's decrease in other services because now we're only being able to fund the streets. So, just the cost of the development style that we have here is just unsustainable. Never mind from the environmental standpoint, like concrete and pavement water doesn't drain very well off of it. It doesn't naturally drain properly. It contributes to climate change by adding to the urban heat island effect, which it can be up to 5 or 6 degrees cooler in outlying areas away from cities, just because of asphalt reflecting the sun and heating the ground more as you're getting more direct sunlight onto the ground. Just the simple thing of putting making your parking lot surrounded by trees and having trees on the islands and having trees next to your buildings. Super important to keep your city cool in the long term. Because, air conditionings are great, right? Maybe not everyone here in Nanaimo has air conditioning, but that is having a carbon impact, so that's contributing to climate change. So, yourself keeping cool is actually contributing to the planet being warmer and you needing to use more of your air conditioning. So, there's kind of that whole thing, right? planting a tree. It may not be tall enough to provide shade today, but in 20 years, you're going to be shading out your house, and it can even reduce heating costs in the winter by providing insulation as well. Some documented effects of this have been brought in a study a research project I did in school. But there's a lot of different stuff going on, right? You've got the problem is complex, right? Once we built all this infrastructure, how are we supposed to change it to the better, right? Once we have these massive parking lots, what are we supposed to do with them? And it's hard for towns, right? There's a lot of people that are adamant that they need to drive absolutely everywhere, and that probably won't change ever. But, we need to make viable options for people who don't want to drive as well, so...
I mean, in bigger cities like Vancouver, it's changing a little bit, because I see a lot of people riding bikes, scooters, their transit system's really good, but there's still a lot of cars on the road. But a lot of them are driving, but they're getting the electric vehicles, which I heard that's not even that good for the environment, because mining the lithium for the batteries for those electric vehicles is worse for the environment.
Yeah, and so it's pretty much like this whole thing of out of sight, out of mind. I don't see the effects. I don't see the emissions coming out the tailpipe, therefore, I'm saving the environment. Well... not so fast, all the impacts that we just talked about when it comes to having parking, that's not going to disappear when it comes to electric cars. Electric cars are still occupying a parking space. They still need pavement. They still need all this stuff that's contributing to climate change, as well as the mining of the lithium. So the best option is make it easy for people who don't want to drive to not drive by providing good cycling infrastructure and good walking infrastructure. That's, making the cycling paths that are direct and making cars go around as an option to make it so that cycling is the fastest route from point A to point B, not driving. Or, giving buses priority signals and priority lanes so that taking the bus is faster than driving.
Yeah. I also think if Elon Musk put his energy into developing self-driving buses or electric buses, you could have buses running all the time.
Yeah, and that's a great thing, but so it's far from going to happen, and we don't necessarily need self-driving buses. It's a good source of employment for people.
Yeah.
Everyone driving in their private cars. Well, it's good for auto manufacturers. Sure, but a lot of the cars are manufactured overseas, and the ones that are manufactured in the U.S., or Canada, some are, but it's somewhat limited. I mean, there's the repair shops, but again, that's kind of... You're going to have repair shops with buses that may need to be serviced even potentially more regularly than an average car, so you're still going to have those jobs. They're just going to look a bit different. And we're also going to talk about, the fact that, like highways and freeway expansions, and it makes cities less inviting to people that are not in a car, or that people who, if you have a freeway in your downtown, it's designed, your downtown should be a place for people, not for cars. And so having just downtown freeways doesn't always make sense. You want people to be out on foot and exploring your downtown, not just driving through at a high speed. So there's a lot we can learn. There's a lot we can do better. Nowhere obviously does these things perfectly. It's all a learning curve. It's all, try something out, build something. Like, here we had Metro Drive. People were complaining a lot. They were protesting, I don't like the bike lane. The road is too narrow. But then, now that it's been in place for a while, I think people are starting to warm up to the idea. They see that my car does fit on this road, and I can still drive here, but it's much safer for people cycling with the dedicated raised cycling path. Mm-hmm. So I think that it's not about taking away people from driving. It's making sure that other modes of transportation are given the same investment, and people are given an option to use something different that isn't driving. If everyone is required to drive because the bus is too far of a walk from your house, the store is too far to walk, you can't cycle because there are no paths and you have to bike on the busy road, or it's even illegal because it's all highways, or that is not a free market system. That is a thing that is forcing you. It's monopolizing driving. It's making it the only option that you have. So is that something that you want in a country that's supposed to be based on the freedom to choose? You're kind of forcing people to take something that they might not even want, and that's also going to be, like, in my opinion, increasing the amount of road rage and traffic accidents, because people are driving who arguably shouldn't be, and they're driving or don't want to be and are careless, or and is that a society that we want to live in, where everyone has to drive, or do we want people to get the exercise? We know that walking and cycling or even taking transit is better for our health, right? We're exercising, like that makes sense, right? If we're in our cars, we're sitting down. If we're out walking, we're moving, we're getting exercise. If we're biking, we're getting exercise. So isn't that a society that's healthier? And if you've been to any city in North America, you're gonna see the endless streams of drive-through restaurants.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and like, people like their fast food, but that culture of drive-through is an auto-oriented development where people are just too. I mean, there is valid reasons for drive-throughs. Don't get me wrong. Like, people with disabilities and so on have a valid reason to go to the drive-through, but the average citizen, most people, outside of a very small percentage of people, can physically park their car and walk into the store without needing to idle, causing pollution and causing spillover traffic on the neighboring streets with the drive-through. And then we also are going to talk about how we have a lot of malls here in Nanaimo. If you want to walk to a mall, in order to get to the entrance, well, you have to walk across huge parking lots that are often unsafe for walking with lots of traffic.
Yeah.
Why haven't we as a society just decided, let's build the storefront entrances right up to the road and then have the parking lots in behind, so that anyone walking, though, they can just be walking along the sidewalk and then into the store instead of having to cut all the way across the parking lot to get to the store, risking their own lives. This isn't even going to cost the store any more money, really, because they're just going to be parking in behind. Drivers might have to walk a few extra feet. For the average citizen, again, it's minor inconvenience, minor compared to the amount that it will save the people who are walking and cycling. And there are accommodations for people in wheelchairs and with mobility issues. We can work that kind of stuff out. We can add an entrance at the back of the store where the parking lot is and have one in the front, for example, or provide ramps, or whatever that may be, to be able to allow and maybe even improve the life of those people with disabilities, at the same time as making all people have better access to that store and easier time going through. That makes sense to me, but who knows? I don't have any experience in planning. This is just for me watching, different YouTube channels. Got a lot of this information from Strong Towns, as well as Not Just Bikes. So if you want to check those places out, it's kind of cool to see what kind of thing. And then that's also my opinion. It's been integrated into this, but I mean, not all of this is based on my opinion. A lot of it's from what I've been watched on other YouTube channels like Strong Towns and Not Just Bikes.
Yeah, I think more bike lanes would be a good idea. You'll get Victoria. They have a bike lane connecting from the greater Victoria area to the downtown Victoria area. You can go all the way from Langford to downtown Victoria, which is really cool. Like, we don't really have that. We have nothing really it's harder for someone to get from Cedar, for example, to downtown Nanaimo.
Yeah, like if say you wanted to get from Cedar to downtown Nanaimo, well, pretty much you can't. You could, it's just really dangerous. Cedar Road, you're going to be biking along the edge of a wide road with fast-moving vehicles, frequent semi-truck traffic, and because of the dump, and, sharp corners where people can't see if there's a cyclist there, loud and frequent traffic. Once you get off of Cedar Road, you're going to get dumped onto a highway where the Trans-Canada enters Nanaimo, and there's no sidewalks or shoulders or anywhere for cyclists to really be there. There's 70-kilometer-an-hour speed limit, and there's cars turning, and that's not an environment for cyclists. Like, people may cycle there because they don't have a choice, but people, if they had a choice, they're going to drive their car, Like, they're not going to... We have, in Nanaimo here, we have the ENN Trail Network and the Parkway Trail Network, which are both really good cycling paths. The problem that we have here in Nanaimo with those paths is that unless you live like right on those paths, it's hard to bike to them, and a lot of the ENN Trail is surrounded by land use that, in my opinion, isn't conducive to biking. You've got a lot of car dealerships, a lot of self-storage lockers, a lot of industrial stuff that people aren't biking to. So, again, if you're having a trail like that, it's important that you have, businesses that people want to go to and housing along that route, not just a bunch of car dealerships and self-storage lockers. And there is some, and the ENN Trail is the most used cycling route in the city, so it obviously is doing well, but not as well as it could be if we reinvented our land use around these trails. And the other thing is, it's hot. I personally have been biking on the ENN Trail quite a few times this summer, and it gets really hot. There is no shade anywhere. It's wide open, and it's not a particularly scenic view. It's following right along between a highway and a train track, and there's no trees. There's a bit of dead grass in the median, and it's kind of filled with garbage, and it's not the nicest place to cycle. So that also plays a role. Where is the cycling? Is it a nice bike ride? Is it a nice walk? Or is it just, you're just doing it because you have to? People want to walk in nice environments, and people who are walking care more about what the outside looks like. That's just my opinion, because if I'm driving, I'm not really seeing what's going by. Like, if the side of the road is littered with garbage, I'm not really going to see it that much because I'm driving really fast. I'm not really going to care that much. If I'm walking, I don't want to be stepping over broken glass and needles and all kinds of other just junk. I'm going to want to be walking on a nice place with, greenery and trees and that kind of thing. So that might influence my decision to drive or walk as well. So, but again, other people probably have a different opinion, but, we're getting quite controversial here. We're talking about a lot of political stuff, and people have different opinions, but, a lot of this makes sense to me, so that's just my opinion from the research I've been doing and the videos I've been watching, just talking about how cities here do need a rethink. So, what do you think, Logan?
I think we need more bike lanes, and think in regards to the highway, some bike bridges would be nice. So instead of you being right beside the highway, you can just, if you need to go somewhere across, you can go over, not even disrupt traffic. Like, we've had a couple of those in Nanaimo, like bridges to go over the highway to the other parts, which is helpful because then you're not disrupting traffic for a crosswalk or anything.
Yeah, I would say that is the point of a pedestrian bridge, is to most people who are crossing would rather, if I'm a cyclist or I'm a pedestrian, I'm going to rather cross at grade level. I don't want to really walk up a giant ramp, across a bridge, and back down when I could just walk directly across the street. So I think this is kind of a car-centric approach to thinking about it, where we're trying to inconvenience cars the least. So our goal is to keep cars moving as much as possible, which is discouraging people from using other modes of transportation. It's not to say that pedestrian bridges are bad. There are good examples of ones that are necessary. But I think that just providing safer crossings at the street, at lights, or in between crossings is a better thing to do for a lot less cost rather than building, these expensive overpass bridges for mostly the benefit of people who are driving. That's my opinion, but again, there is some pros to it, like you said, like you're removing but it's going to take those cyclists and pedestrians a lot more time to climb up the bridge, over, and then walk down, because oftentimes you have to walk your bike because they're too narrow to bike, right?
Yeah.
Some people are afraid of heights. The noise tends to be worse from my experience being on them. So you're getting a lot more noise because you're above as the noise is rising. You're also getting the pollution from the cars going up a bit more because, pollution, the CO2 coming out of the exhaust is rising up. Yeah. It's not really blowing to the side too much. It's mostly going up. So you're getting more of the pollution coming from that. So, there's advantages of it. There's places where it's literally not practical to build have a safe pedestrian crossings and keep efficient vehicle traffic. A good example would be in Las Vegas Boulevard in Tropicana, where the intersection is just too wide. There's too many pedestrians. You couldn't build. It wouldn't be safe. You'd have to have too long of cycles, and traffic would be too bad, and it wouldn't even be safe for pedestrians. So there are times where a pedestrian bridge is really good, but I think for the most part, they should be tried to be limited and be used in areas where they make the most sense. Like, for example, crossing freeways, highways that don't have traffic signals, where there's too many lanes to cross in an efficient amount of time, that kind of thing. Or even like rail crossings, if there's extremely frequent trains going there, like really wide rail yards or stuff like that. Pedestrian bridges make a lot of sense. They don't necessarily make too much sense for a 2-lane or 4-lane, because there's 2 in each direction, road that has traffic signals. We don't really need to build them there. No. Doesn't make a lot of sense. You can, but that's, in my opinion, not what you're wanting to do. But
but then people go fast on highways. People blow red lights all the time. That's kind of the safety concern I was thinking of crosswalks and stuff.
Yeah, there is definitely that safety concern, but I think that's drivers. They're driving a metal box that weighs thousands of pounds, right? If they're blowing red lights, they shouldn't have a driver's license if they've done it enough times.
Yeah.
If they're endangering people, that that's their fault. So it makes sense. Crosswalks, if it's a really high volume pedestrian intersection with high speeds, that makes sense. But in my opinion, we should be trying to avoid conflict points like that, where we have high volumes of pedestrians wanting to cross roads of high speeds. So that's why we should have lower speed limits in town where there's conflicts with pedestrians and cyclists. That it makes sense to me, but it does. There's a safety concern there. That's a very valid point on why we should build. But that just means that instead of investing in the huge bridge, we should be investing in making that intersection safer. controls to prevent drivers from running red lights, like red light cameras to catch them if they run a red light, for example, could be used, or traffic calming measures if it's a really busy street, like narrowing the lanes right before the light so that people are encouraged to drive slower through the intersection. Or other measures that may, like, warning flashing lights before the intersection so drivers know to stop and slow down before they reach the intersection. So that they're not just, I'm just cruising along here at 70, right? And if there's a flashing light warning me to slow down, well, I might slow down before I get to the light. But otherwise, my stopping distance is too great. I won't be able to stop, so I'll just blow right through the light.
Yeah.
So those kind of measures, I think. And then trying to come up with ways to reduce the crossing distance for anyone walking so that they're not having to walk as far across the street. So whether that may be in some cities, I think they provide islands in the center that are wide enough and have trees planted on them for people to wait. Could be an option if the crossing is really far or whatever. But the general is trying to make the pedestrian crossings short as possible in streets that have lower speed limits in general, to make sure that all road users are safe. I mean, pedestrians shouldn't have to be inconvenienced in order to stay safe on the road, right? By having, if they have to climb up the overpass and go over, that can take 5 or 10 minutes in some of them, right?
Yeah.
We need to just make sure that the roads are safe for all users.
And I think that Victoria does that really well. They have very safe crosswalks for their trails to go downtown on bikes and walking.
Yeah, so that's the kind of thing that we need to see more of. More emphasis on safety, because we know that pedestrians, if there's an accident between a pedestrian and a vehicle, well, the pedestrian is going to suffer worse outcomes. They're more likely to die as a result of being hit by a car.
Yeah.
So both parties could be responsible, but there has to be some responsibility taken by drivers to try that. I can be inconvenienced a little bit in order to ensure the safety of people walking. That, it's not to say I can't drive, but maybe you have to just slow down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
That seems logical. If it's going to save someone's life, we inconvenience people all the time in the name of safety, so that seems logical.
Yeah, and then I guess also, it's important to decrease the speeds in certain parts, kind of like they do if you're going downtown on the highway, it turns to 60, then to 50.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we also, if we're decreasing vehicle speeds, the speed limit isn't necessarily as important as the design of the road.
Mm-hmm.
So if we want vehicles to drive slow, we need narrow lanes with, stuff that's going to impede people and make them drive slower.
Mm-hmm.
Say you have a massive road, right? It's really wide and it's straight lines, high cleared right away, and the speed limit says you're coming along and there's no change in road design, right? You're coming along, the speed limit's been 80 this whole time. You come in here, there's no change in road design, and all of a sudden you hit a sign that says 50. What's the chances that you're actually going to drive 50 in that area? Virtually none. You're not going to. The road design is telling you it's built to a speed. So if we want to decrease the speed limit, we need to change the road design. Add traffic calming if we want to slow it down. We really want to slow people down, raised elevated crosswalks like they have on Front Street. That's slowing vehicles to a certain speed. Narrower lanes to keep people driving slower. People are going to drive to a speed that feels comfortable to them to drive at. I know that personally. I'm unlikely to slow down. I'm likely to drive too fast if the road is too wide. So instead of blaming drivers for driving too fast, we need to blame the road design for telling people that it's safe to drive too fast, right? If we have narrow lanes, people are going to they're not going to feel comfortable driving fast.
Well, that's true too. Also, heads up for slowing down. Like we have at one intersection, it says after this intersection, it's 60, which is a little bit unsafe because of the why is it right over past the intersection?
Mm-hmm.
If you're going, that's gonna cause an accident just because people are not. It's too quick of a change. So for more well in advance signs that saying up ahead, the speed's gonna change. So then people can almost. What I typically do sometimes, depending on the traffic and stuff, I'll slow down a little bit so I'm prepared for when it's gonna switch to the speed limit. Not like I'm not gonna go exactly that speed limit, but I might decrease it by like, a few kilometers an hour just to be closer to what I need to be at.
Yeah, that totally makes sense, right? And we've always designed roads for the convenience of people driving, and we've started realizing that there are other people that need to use these roads other than people in cars.
Mm-hmm.
People need to walk. Not everyone can afford a car, so making sure that the most vulnerable road users that may not have any other choice other than to walk in dangerous places feel safe and are safe. Poor people are way more likely to be walking and cycling compared to richer people.
Yeah.
So that they're already at a disadvantage. So we should make sure that road is equitable and fair for everyone that's using it.
It's also the disability community for people who don't have the mental capacity to drive, or they don't have the they have like limitations on and not comfortable driving, or high anxiety, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Like that's why we need to make sure that there are options for people who don't want to drive or can't drive. Mm-hmm. It's not that we need to get rid of cars. It's that we need to build viable alternatives for people who want them, and that's, I think, where we're heading. But it's a slow progress, and it may take inconveniencing drivers a little bit. But if that means a safer and more fair and more equitable community, then that's what needs to take place in our city, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's always been that lower income people are affected by all these changes, and that's we need to do something to help out these people. Everyone in our city deserves to be safe on our streets. So
that's true. Anyways, I just realized we just passed the hour mark on the podcast. I don't know how long these episodes are gonna be, but I think we should maybe wrap it up soon. Sure. I think we've been talking for a good amount of time.
Yeah.
Lots of points in there. Also, you might have heard a dog barking. That was my dog making her debut, so that might appear in the podcast because I'll just have probably no way to edit it out unless I edit out that segment, but we'll see.
Wow, I think that was a lot of meaningful conversation happening, and a lot of stuff that you might not think about, and give it a thought. And if any of the stuff you're saying makes sense, well, maybe go talk to your local counselor or somebody about what you're seeing in your community, but raise your concerns. A better city doesn't just start from, or a better environment, a better all these things like climate change, better cities. All of it starts with advocacy from concerned citizens. If you want to see your environment with more green space or safer streets or more trees or less wildfires, well, start talking, start making these conversations and having them with people. They're difficult to have. People have differing opinions. That is okay. The important thing is that these dialogues are happening, and that municipal figures or politicians are not just guessing at what people want. We need to show them what we want.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the biggest take home from this message, is just have these conversations. Talk to people about what you want to see in your community and for the environment.
Anyways, I think that's going to do it for the podcast. Also, feel free in the comments on YouTube to share your thoughts on this, as well as other topics and segments and ideas you have for me for this podcast to be successful. if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you subscribe, turn on bell notifications, and like this podcast if you enjoyed it. Also, if you're listening on Spotify, hit that follow button. It just shows your support to us, and it just means a lot to see interactions. So yeah, anyways, I'll see you in the next one. Peace.